We will now discuss some of the submission validation errors you may encounter when uploading files to CalPads for PSTS or adding records manually online in CalPads. Here's a list of errors you will encounter when uploading PSTS records to CalPads or manually adding records to CalPads. However, before we go into the details of each of these errors, let me just explain to you how to troubleshoot errors in CalPads. First, you have to know what documentations to use. So at the bottom of CalPads, you have some of the essential documents that you may need in troubleshooting errors, primarily the CalPads error list. So if you click on that and open the CalPads error list, you should be able to see the different errors, descriptions, suggested resolutions for a specific error that you will encounter. So since we are discussing PSTS, let's look at the PSTS error list. So at the bottom, you have different tabs corresponding to the file type. You just have to scroll to the right to get to the file type that you want to look at. So let's click on post-secondary status, and you should see the different errors here, error numbers, the name, description, the severity, and the fields that CalPAS is using to validate these errors or validate the records, and some suggested resolutions. Most of the time, CalPAS will look at the rejected record, the values in the rejected record. However, sometimes, aside from the values in the rejected record, it also compares it to some other required data in CalPADS ODS. Let's now discuss some of the errors that you will encounter. First is PSTS error 0476. For this error, the error description is missing CELPA code. So CalPads looks at the following fields here, 17.10, reporting CELPA, and the education program participation type code. These are the fields being validated. And it turns out that the error is that you submitted a PSTS record with an education program participation type code of 30 SPED, but you failed to indicate the reporting CELPA value. So to correct this, you have to populate the reporting CELPA and resubmit the file if you are uploading or posting or adding a file through batch upload. If you're doing it in online maintenance, you just have to populate the field that is missing the value. Now, the next error is the PSTS 0478. CalPads looks at the local special education student ID and again, the education program participation type. So it turns out that since you submitted a PSTS record with an education program participation type code of 30 special ed, the local education student ID is also required. Unfortunately, that value is missing as well. So as I've mentioned earlier in the training, when you submit a PSTS record of 30 education program type code, you are required to populate the reporting CELPA and the local special education student ID. Failure to do so will trigger 478 for the local special education ID or 476 for a missing reporting CELPA. Please take note of that. So let's now discuss another error, PSTS 0479. So as I've mentioned earlier, sometimes CalPads doesn't just look at the values in the rejected record. It sometimes compares the values in the rejected record to records in the CalPads ODS. Okay, so for PSTS 0479, it's stating that, again, you are submitting a education program participation type code of 30, special education. However, in CalPads, the student does not have an existing SPED record. Okay, so how do we determine if a student has an existing record or not? So since we are submitting graduates from the 18-19 academic year. During that year, CalPADS was still using Student Program Record 144 to identify special ed students. And so the field being validated was 3.13. However, in succeeding years, you should be able to compare it to the special education program exit date in the SPED file. So let's look at this student's record. So we're submitting a PSTS record with education program type code 30. Okay. And CalPADS is saying you can submit it, but because the student was not special ed in the 18-19 year. So we go to the student details section, click on student program, and true enough, the student was not special ed in the 18-19 academic year. And that's the reason why the error triggered. So make sure that at least for this year, when you submit the PSTS record of students with disabilities in end of year 4, make sure that the students were special ed at any point during the year in the 18-19 academic year. Otherwise, you will trigger PSTS 0479. So just a reminder, after academic year 1920, so let's say in the 2021 academic year submission end of year 4, the PSTS will look at a SPED record. Okay, it's just this year that CalPAS will look at the SPRG 144 record. So the next error that we will be discussing is PSTS error 0480. The error description is saying that the CTE student must have exited the SENR record. Okay, so we're claiming that the student was a CTE completer in the 18-19 academic year. So we have a PSTS record here with an education program type code of 20. However, just like any other PSTS record, you only submit a PSTS record if the student was a completer in high school during the previous academic year. Okay, looking at this student's enrollment record, the student was not exited with a completer exit. The exit here is E155, which is just a end of year exit, and you're expecting the student to come back next year. If you mistakenly use E155, replace it with an E230 and one of the completion codes that is allowed. Okay. Now, if the student is still at your school, then of course, you don't have to submit a PSTS record for them. So similarly, if you submitted a PSTS record for a student who was special ed, and it turns out that the student does not have the necessary student exit reason code in CalPAS for that prior academic year, then it triggers a PSTS 0481. So the PSTS 0480 normally triggers during Fall 2 submission because you're reporting either a CTE completer or maybe a CPA later on when CPA information are collected as well, while PSTS 0481 will trigger in end of year 4 when you submit special education related PSTS records. So these are the common errors you will encounter, and the key thing here is knowing what documentation to use, which is the error list, and how to interpret the errors.